Rain didn't fall that night. The city that once trembled under one man's command now shimmered beneath sheets of cold silver water. Neon signs flickered against puddles like dying memories. Every alley carried whispers. Every window held secrets. And into that silence, he returned. They used to call him the King of the Underworld. A man whose name alone could end wars before they began. Deals were sealed with a nod. Lives were erased with a glance. He didn't just control the empire, he was the empire. Until he vanished. No funeral. No arrest. No public execution. Just disappearance. Some said rivals took him out. Others believed he ran after a scandal too humiliating to survive. The tabloids whispered about betrayal, about infidelity, about the night he shattered his marriage in a room full of powerful men who would never forget what they saw. But legends don't die easily. They wait. A black car rolled slowly into the district he once owned. Tinted windows. Engine quiet. Controlled power. The door opened. He stepped out. Older, but not weaker. His hair shorter, streaked with silver. His jaw sharper. His eyes colder than the rain soaking his tailored coat. He paused. This was his territory. The club across the street used to operate under his protection. Every bottle poured inside had his invisible signature on it. Tonight, the guards at the entrance didn't recognize him. They didn't lower their heads. They didn't step aside. They simply stared. He walked past them without asking permission. Inside, the music pounded. Lights flashed. Money moved. But something felt wrong. Different. The manager approached him cautiously. Not with fear. Not with respect. With confusion. "Can I help you?" The king didn't answer immediately. His gaze scanned the room. The VIP balcony that once belonged to him now occupied by unfamiliar faces. Armed men stood in corners that used to be commanded by his most loyal soldiers. Loyal? A bitter word. "I built this place," he said quietly. The manager hesitated. "This establishment operates under new ownership." New ownership. The words hit harder than any bullet ever had. He turned and walked out without another word. Outside, his phone vibrated. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago. No answer. Another number. Disconnected. A third. But, one by one, the voices that once swore blood loyalty had gone silent. Not dead. Silent. That meant something far worse. He drove to his penthouse next. The tower still scraped the clouds like an arrogant monument to his legacy. For years, the top floor had been untouchable territory. His sanctuary. His throne. The lobby receptionist didn't even look up at him. When he reached the elevator, he entered the old access code. Denied. He tried again. Denied. Security approached, politely but firmly. "Sir, that floor requires updated authorization." Updated authorization. He stared at the digital panel like it had betrayed him personally. Who had the power to change his codes? Who had the authority to erase him from his own kingdom? The answer came slowly. Not from logic. From instinct. There was only one person who knew every weakness in his empire. Every offshore account. Every hidden shipment route. Every captain who secretly feared him more than respected him. His ex-wife. The woman he once dismissed as ornamental. Silent. Decorative. Loyal. The woman he humiliated the night everything began to fall apart. He hadn't thought of her as dangerous. He had thought of her as temporary. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a notification from a financial contact overseas. Urgent. He opened it. Every major account he once controlled had been legally transferred over the past 2 years. Cleanly. Strategically. Quietly. Signed documents. Board restructures. International partnerships. All under one name. Hers. He exhaled slowly, but his chest felt tight. This wasn't a hostile takeover. This was a surgical replacement. No war. No blood in the streets. No loud betrayal. Just erasure. He got back into his car and told the driver one word: follow. The vehicle moved toward the heart of the district, the headquarters building he once ruled from the top floor. As they approached, he saw something that made the rain feel colder. A convoy of black SUVs. Armed guards stepped out. Disciplined. Organized. Professional. And then, she emerged. Not the woman he remembered. Not the wife who once waited at home while he negotiated with killers. This woman walked like command belonged to her. Her expression calm. Controlled. Untouchable. The guards opened doors for her. Men who once answered only to him now stood at her side. She didn't look around nervously. She didn't seek approval. She didn't hesitate. She owned the night. For a brief second, her eyes lifted and locked with his across the street. No shock. No anger. No fear. Only recognition. As if she had known this moment would come. As if she had prepared for it. The king felt something unfamiliar crawl into his chest. Not rage. Not jealousy. Had she forced him out? Or had she simply stepped in when he left a vacuum? The headquarters doors closed behind her. The guards remained. And for the first time in his life, the man who once controlled the city realized something terrifying. He no longer controlled anything. The rain kept falling. The empire kept breathing. But it was breathing without him. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the city he built, someone had decided he was no longer necessary. The Ghost King had returned. But the throne did not wait. And the question now wasn't whether he would reclaim it. The question was, who truly erased him, and why? They all thought she was invisible. That was her greatest advantage. Back when he ruled the city, she sat beside him at long mahogany tables where deals worth millions were negotiated between men who smelled of expensive cologne and quiet violence. She wore silk, diamonds, a controlled smile. They assumed she didn't understand the language of power. They were wrong. She listened. Every shipment route disguised as a charity export. Every coded phrase used to signal a hit. Every argument between captains fighting for territory. Every hesitation in a voice that pretended loyalty. She noticed everything. And the night he humiliated her, publicly, recklessly, arrogantly, something inside her shifted. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. He had built an empire on fear. But fear has a weakness. It depends entirely on the one who inspires it. The moment he showed recklessness, the moment he showed emotional instability, cracks formed. She saw them. The captains didn't question him openly. But their eyes changed. Respect turned into calculation. Loyalty turned into insurance. And she realized something chilling. The empire wasn't loyal to him. It was loyal to stability. That night, while he drowned in pride and scandal, she made her first quiet decision. She would learn the game better than the man who invented it. She began subtly. Conversations in hallways. Private charity meetings with politicians he had bribed for years. Checking financial summaries under the excuse of helping organize documents. He never noticed. Why would he? To him, she was still just the wife who waited. But she wasn't waiting anymore. She was mapping the entire structure of his kingdom. She discovered which captains felt underpaid. Which alliances were fragile. Which rivals were growing stronger in silence. Which offshore accounts were vulnerable to legal pressure. And most importantly, she learned which men feared prison more than they feared him. That was the turning point. Because fear of a man fades. Fear of losing freedom does not. Months passed. Then a year. His reckless decisions increased. Late-night indulgences. Public scandals. Risky territorial expansions that cost more blood than profit. The empire began to bleed quietly. He didn't see it. But she did. So she started offering something different. Not rebellion. Stability. She approached his most disciplined captain first, the one who had served since the early days. I don't want chaos, she told him calmly. I want sustainability. The word confused him. Crime syndicates didn't use words like that. But she explained in numbers. Projected profits. Reduced exposure. Cleaner laundering channels. She didn't threaten. She demonstrated. The captain didn't betray the king that day. But he began listening. One by one, she planted seeds. To the financial advisor, she offered protection from upcoming investigations. To the logistics chief, she offered modernization and fewer unnecessary risks. To the younger soldiers, she promised less reckless bloodshed. She never once said she wanted power. That made her more powerful. Meanwhile, the king spiraled deeper into ego-driven decisions. The scandal surrounding his infidelity weakened his image. Rivals tested boundaries. Law enforcement pressure intensified. And when the inevitable happened, when he disappeared after a disastrous operation that nearly exposed the entire network, the empire stood at a crossroads. Panic spread. Who would lead? Who could keep them out of prison? Who could prevent rival factions from tearing them apart? She didn't step forward immediately. She let them ask for her. It was subtle. A financial document here. A strategic suggestion there. A quiet meeting where she calmly explained how to restructure offshore assets before authorities could freeze them. Within weeks, chaos stabilized. Within months, profits rose. Within a year, the empire had transformed. Less public violence. More precision. Fewer emotional decisions. More calculated expansion into international markets. She replaced fear with predictability. And men who once laughed at her presence now waited for her approval. But here's what no one understood. She wasn't acting out of revenge. Revenge is emotional. This was survival. She had seen something the others hadn't. Before his disappearance, powerful external investors had started circling. International players. Corporate fronts masking criminal conglomerates far larger than their local empire. They had one condition: replace unstable leadership or be erased completely. She chose to act before they did. And so she erased him first. Legally. Strategically. Quietly. Assets transferred through shell corporations. Leadership titles restructured. Security codes changed. Loyalty redirected. By the time he vanished, the transition was already in motion. Not a coup. An evolution. But she never told anyone the full truth. Because even as she rose to the top, she felt something unsettling. Certain opportunities appeared too easily. Certain international connections seemed almost prearranged. It was as if someone had anticipated her ambition. As if someone wanted her in power. And now, years later, he had returned. She watched from the back seat of her armored car as reports came in. He's back in the district. He visited the club. He tried accessing the penthouse. No panic touched her expression. She had prepared for this possibility from the very beginning. Because she knew something he didn't. His removal had protected the empire. But it may have also protected him. From what? That was the part she never revealed. As her convoy approached headquarters, her phone vibrated with a private encrypted message from an unknown international contact. Is he ready? Her fingers hovered over the screen. Ready for what? She stepped out of the car, cameras nowhere in sight, guards forming a silent wall around her. Across the street she saw him, soaked in rain, watching, realizing. For a second, their eyes met. Not as husband and wife, not as lovers, but as two strategists who had finally reached the same chessboard. The woman who learned the game had mastered it. But in mastering it, had she stepped into something far larger than either of them? Because somewhere beyond the city lights, someone else was watching. And they had been planning this long before she ever made her first move. Power doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes. Slowly, quietly, almost politely. And when the Ghost King walked back into the city he once owned, he expected resistance. He did not expect indifference. The next morning, he summoned 3 of his former captains to a private warehouse on the docks, a place where loyalty had once been sealed in blood and silence. Only one showed up. Older now, thicker around the shoulders, eyes sharper. He used to stand half a step behind the king. Today, he stood directly across from him. No security? The king asked, scanning the shadows. Marco's voice was steady. There's no need. That sentence said more than any threat could. The king studied him carefully. I built this network. Every route. Every alliance. You remember that? I remember, Marco replied. But things changed. Because I was gone. Marco hesitated. No, he said quietly. Because you were becoming unpredictable. The word hit harder than betrayal. Unpredictable. The king had once believed unpredictability was power. Fear thrived on it. Rivals hesitated when they couldn't calculate him. But inside an empire, unpredictability is instability. Marco pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. Numbers. Clean numbers. Profit margins from the last 2 years had doubled. Losses from street-level conflicts had dropped by nearly 40%. International investments had expanded into sectors the king had never touched: tech logistics, offshore data hubs, private security firms. This is under her leadership, Marco said. The king's jaw tightened. She's using my structure. She refined it. Silence filled the warehouse. Outside, cranes moved cargo containers like silent witnesses to the exchange. She turned chaos into a system, Marco continued. No unnecessary wars. No emotional decisions. No public scandals. That last line lingered. The king stepped closer. Are you telling me the empire is better without me? Marco didn't answer immediately. That's not what I'm saying. But it's safer. Safer. The king laughed, but there was no humor in it. I built this place on fear. And fear almost destroyed it, Marco replied. The words hung heavy between them. For the first time, the king felt something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not humiliation. Displacement. He left the docks without another word. That night, he visited one of his old underground casinos, once a chaotic arena of loud money and louder violence. But it was quiet, refined. Security operated with military precision. Surveillance systems had been upgraded. Staff moved like trained professionals, not desperate hustlers. He walked through the main floor unnoticed. Unnoticed. At a private table in the back, 2 younger lieutenants were speaking in low tones. She stabilized everything. We don't worry about raids anymore. Profits are cleaner. He stepped forward. And loyalty? He asked. They froze when they recognized him. One of them swallowed. Loyalty is to the empire. Not to you. The message was clear. He left before pride forced him to react. As days passed, he noticed something even more unsettling. No one spoke badly about him. There were no curses. No accusations. Just evolution. She hadn't painted him as a villain. She had reframed him as obsolete. That was far more dangerous. In private meetings, he began to uncover patterns. Decisions she made months before his disappearance had quietly limited his authority. Certain captains had been given more independence. Certain financial controls had shifted from his direct command to shared oversight. At the time, he hadn't noticed. Because he hadn't been looking. Had she anticipated his fall? Or had she engineered it? One encrypted message arrived from an anonymous sender late one night. You were never betrayed. You were replaced. Replaced. He replayed the last year before his disappearance in his mind. The risky expansion into rival territory, she had advised against it. The public scandal that damaged his image, she had warned him about optics. The financial exposure that nearly triggered international investigations, she had suggested restructuring months earlier. Every warning he dismissed. Every caution he ignored. Was it arrogance that cost him the throne? Or design? Finally, he requested a private meeting with the inner circle, those who had once sworn eternal loyalty. They gathered in the headquarters conference room. His room. But even that felt different now. Digital screens lined the walls. Real-time financial data streamed silently. International maps glowed with new routes and connections. He stood at the head of the table. I'm back, he said simply. No applause. No resistance. Just measured silence. One senior advisor spoke carefully. With respect, the structure is functioning. Functioning, he repeated. Efficiently. And if I resume leadership? Another pause. Then there will be disruption. Disruption. They weren't afraid of him. They were afraid of instability. He looked around the room. These were men who once would have killed on his command without question. Now they calculated risk. And he was the risk. He left the meeting knowing something terrifying. The empire hadn't been stolen. It had evolved beyond him. Late that evening, from across the street, He watched the headquarters again. Her convoy arrived with silent authority. She stepped out, calm as ever. Inside that building, she wasn't ruling through fear. She was ruling through consensus. That made her stronger than he had ever been. But as he turned away, another thought crept into his mind. If everything was stable, profits were rising, if law enforcement pressure had decreased, why did certain international transactions seem overly complex? Why were there encrypted channels even the inner circle couldn't fully access? And why did some decisions appear designed not just to replace him, but to protect something larger? He looked back at the glowing tower. The empire had rejected its founder. But what if the rejection wasn't personal? What if it was preparation? Because somewhere inside that structure, someone had planned for his removal long before he disappeared. And the question wasn't whether he could take his throne back. The question was, had the throne ever truly belonged to him at all? War doesn't always begin with bullets. Sometimes, it begins with an invitation. The message arrived at exactly 8 p.m. No greeting, no emotion, just an address. Their old house. The one he bought the year his empire first crossed international borders. The one with marble floors imported from Italy and windows tall enough to make a king feel infinite. He hadn't stepped inside it since the night everything collapsed. Yet now, he stood at the gate again. The security system scanned him, but this time, it allowed entry. That was intentional. Inside, nothing looked the same. The artwork he chose was gone. The dark red furniture replaced with minimalist tones, black, ivory, controlled elegance. Even the lighting felt colder. Calculated. She was already seated at the long dining table. Alone. No guards in sight. No visible weapons. Which meant she didn't need them. "You came," she said calmly. He didn't sit immediately. He studied her. Years ago, she would have avoided eye contact during confrontations. Now she held his gaze like a strategist assessing risk. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. "I wanted you to understand." He finally took a seat across from her. The distance between them felt wider than the entire city. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was tactical. "You think I betrayed you," she said. "You erased me." "No," she corrected. "I prevented a collapse." His jaw tightened. "You replaced me. I stabilized what you were destabilizing." There was no anger in her tone. No bitterness. That unsettled him more than rage ever could. "You built the empire on fear," she continued. "And fear worked until it didn't." He leaned forward. "Fear made us untouchable. It made us visible." That word lingered. Visible. "You became reckless," she said. "Public scandals. Emotional decisions. Risky expansions. Law enforcement pressure was rising internationally. Investors were questioning sustainability." "Investors?" he repeated sharply. She paused. And for the first time that evening, something flickered behind her calm expression. "You think we were operating alone?" she asked quietly. He said nothing. She continued. "The empire outgrew you long before you realized it. There were people watching, evaluating, deciding whether to integrate us into something bigger or erase us." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Global networks," she replied. "Corporate fronts masking transnational operations. They don't tolerate instability." "And I was instability?" "Yes." The word landed like a gunshot. She didn't soften it. "They were preparing to move against us," she said. "Financial audits. Political pressure. Silent sanctions. You would have been the first target." "And you saved me?" he asked coldly. "I removed you from the equation." The audacity of her calmness shook him. "You could have told me. You wouldn't have listened." That was true. And they both knew it. The air between them grew heavier. "Why not eliminate me completely?" he asked. "You had the power. Because you weren't the enemy." "Then who is?" She didn't answer. Instead, she poured wine into 2 glasses and slid one toward him. He didn't touch it. "You still don't see it," she said softly. "This isn't about us anymore." He felt it then. Not fear. Pressure. Like an invisible presence in the room. You think you're in control, she continued. But even I am not fully in control. That was the first crack. You expect me to believe you're a puppet? He asked. I expect you to understand that the board is bigger than you imagined. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city skyline. When you disappeared, they wanted blood. A public example. A signal to other unstable leaders. His pulse slowed. And you convinced them otherwise? I convinced them that restructuring was more profitable. And what did it cost you? She didn't respond immediately. That's not your concern. He stood now, stepping closer. You removed my name from everything. My accounts. My properties. My authority. That wasn't protection. That was execution without a body. It was insulation, she replied sharply. If they audited the empire and your name was still attached, you would have vanished for real. The room fell silent again. But this silence carried something darker. What do they want now? He asked quietly. Her phone vibrated on the table. Both of them looked at it. Encrypted number. She didn't pick it up. They're watching how you react, she admitted. If you attempt to reclaim control violently, they will respond. With what? Finality. He understood that tone. He had used it himself for years. You invited me here to warn me, he said. I invited you here to give you a choice. What choice? Adapt or become a threat? He stepped back, absorbing the weight of it. So this is psychological warfare, he said slowly. You remove me. Restructure everything. Tell me I was a liability. Then offer me a place under your terms. I'm offering survival. No, he replied coldly. You're offering submission. Their eyes locked. Two rulers. One throne. Neither fully free. And if I refuse? He asked. She looked at him, not as a former husband, but as a calculation. Then you won't be fighting me, she said. You'll be fighting something you can't see. The phone vibrated again. Longer this time. Insistent. Neither moved. The city lights flickered outside like distant signals. For the first time in his life, the Ghost King realized something terrifying. This wasn't a war for the throne. It was a test. And someone else was grading them both. He turned toward the door. As he reached it, she spoke one final sentence. They needed you gone, she said quietly. But they may still need you. He paused, but didn't look back. Need him for what? As he stepped into the cold night air, he felt it again. Eyes. Not hers. Something larger. Watching. Waiting. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the empire, a decision about his fate was already being made. There is always a throne. But there is not always a king. And sometimes, there is something above both. The Ghost King didn't go home after leaving the house that night. He drove. Through industrial districts. Past silent ports. Beneath overpasses where street soldiers once carried his name like a badge of immortality. Now the city felt different. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Measured. He replayed her words in his mind. They needed you gone. The board is bigger than you imagined. You won't be fighting me. He had ruled through visible dominance. Territory. Weapons. But this was invisible. He pulled into a private storage facility near the outskirts of the city. A place only he knew about. A relic from his earlier, more paranoid years. Inside a locked steel container sat something he had prepared long before he ever met her. Insurance. Hard drives. Paper ledgers. Names that were never digitized. Backup accounts outside the empire's official structure. If someone had restructured everything legally, this was what they couldn't see. He powered up an isolated laptop and began tracing recent international transactions tied to the empire. What he found wasn't local. It wasn't even national. It was global. Shell corporations in Singapore. Investment fronts in Zurich. Maritime holdings tied to offshore data centers. Private security contracts masking something much larger. And woven through all of it, a symbol, not a name. A minimalist crest embedded in metadata. Almost invisible. He'd seen it once before. Years ago. During a private negotiation with an international syndicate that never fully revealed itself. They didn't traffic drugs. They didn't move weapons. They absorbed networks. They restructured criminal empires the way corporations acquired startups. Efficient. Ruthless. He leaned back slowly. This wasn't a takeover born from betrayal. This was an acquisition. And he had been the unstable CO. His phone vibrated. A known number. He answered without speaking. A calm male voice responded. "You've been busy." Silence. "We prefer discretion," the voice continued. "But curiosity is understandable." "Who are you?" he asked coldly. "A partner." "I don't have partners." "You did," the voice corrected. "You just didn't know it." The Ghost King's grip tightened on the phone. "You've been evaluating this empire for years," the voice said. "Your growth was impressive. Your volatility was not." "And she?" he asked. "She demonstrated adaptability." A calculated pause. "Something you lacked." "So this was her plan?" he demanded. "No," the voice replied smoothly. "This was ours." The air in the container felt thinner. "You removed me. We repositioned you." "For what?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Expansion." He almost laughed. "You think I'd work for you?" "We think you understand power," the voice said calmly. "And power at scale requires structure, discipline, long-term vision. And if I refuse?" A faint shift in tone. "Then you become an unsecured variable." He knew exactly what that meant. Elimination. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just efficient. "You built a strong foundation," the voice continued. "But your emotional attachments created vulnerabilities." His mind flashed to her. To the dinner table. To the calm in her voice. "You used her," he said quietly. "She chose alignment. Because you threatened the empire. Because we offered evolution." The line went silent for a second. "We are expanding into territories that require someone who understands legacy psychology, loyalty dynamics, fear architecture." They wanted him. Not as king. As weapon. "We don't destroy empires," the voice said softly. "We refine them." The call ended. No goodbye. No threats. Just certainty. The Ghost King sat alone in the dim container light. For years, he believed he was at the top. Above rivals. Above law enforcement. Above betrayal. But there is always a shadow above the throne. And he had just met it. Across the city, she stood alone in her office at headquarters. Her encrypted device lit up with a secure notification. Assessment phase complete. He understands. She exhaled slowly. This had never been about humiliating him. It had been about preventing a collapse she saw coming long before he did. They approached her first. Not because she was stronger, but because she was quieter, more observant, more patient. They gave her options. Integrate the empire into a global structure, or watch it be dismantled piece by piece. She chose survival. And now, the final phase was unfolding. Her private line rang. She answered. "Is he ready?" the same calm voice asked. "He's aware," she replied carefully. "That will suffice." "And after expansion?" she asked. A brief silence. "We'll evaluate both of you." The call ended. "Both of you." She stared out at the city skyline. For the first time since taking control, she felt it too. Not power. Surveillance. Back in the storage facility, the Ghost King stood slowly. This wasn't a war for a city anymore. It was a recruitment into something global. Bigger markets. Bigger risks. Bigger consequences. He had 3 choices. Fight them, and likely disappear. Submit, and lose the last piece of his autonomy. Or do what he had always done best. Study. The throne he once ruled had been real. But the shadow above it? That was the true empire. And now, both he and the woman who replaced him were standing beneath it. Not enemies. Not allies. Assets. The rain began again as he stepped outside. The city lights flickered like coded signals in the distance. Somewhere beyond borders, beyond governments, beyond visible crime. A larger game was unfolding. And the final question wasn't who would sit on the throne. It was this. When the shadow decides it no longer needs its kings. Who survives?